Her breath came in ragged gasps as she clung to the rough wooden wall of the old barn, the scent of hay and leather thick in the air. Moonlight filtered through the cracks in the boards, casting silver stripes across her pale skin. The preacher's daughter, 19, untouched, raised on sermons and scripture, had never imagined herself here, pressed against the hay bales by a man like him. The giant cowboy towered over her, his broad shoulders blocking out what little light there was. His name was Boone, a drifter who'd ridden into town 2 weeks ago, all quiet intensity and calloused hands. He'd caught her eye during Sunday service, sitting in the back pew with his hat in his lap, dark eyes fixed on her as she sang hymns in the choir. She'd felt those eyes like a brand ever since. Now those same hands gripped her hips, lifting her easily until her legs wrapped around his waist. Her simple cotton dress was bunched up around her thighs, the fabric damp with sweat and something more shameful. She'd come out here to pray, to beg God for strength against the wicked thoughts that plagued her nights. Instead, she'd found Boone waiting in the shadows, as if he'd known she'd come. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling as his mouth found her throat. His beard scraped deliciously against her sensitive skin, sending sparks straight to her core. "We can't. This is wrong." But her body betrayed her words, arching into his touch as his rough fingers slid beneath her dress, tracing the edge of her plain white panties. She'd never been touched like this, never even touched herself beyond innocent curiosity. The preacher's warnings about sin and temptation echoed in her mind, but they felt distant now, drowned out by the pounding of her heart and the heat pooling between her legs. Boone didn't speak. He rarely did. Instead, he kissed her again, deeper this time, his tongue claiming her mouth with a hunger that made her dizzy. She tasted whiskey and smoke on him, dark and dangerous things her father preached against. When he pulled back, his eyes were black in the dim light, fixed on her with single-minded focus. His hand moved higher, pushing her dress up until cool air kissed her bare thighs. She whimpered when his thumb brushed over the damp cotton between her legs, pressing gently against the ache that had been building for weeks. The touch was electric, making her hips jerk involuntarily. Boone. His name slipped out like a prayer and a curse together. He growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating through her where their bodies pressed together. With one swift motion, he hooked his fingers in her panties and pulled. The fabric tore easily, leaving her completely exposed to him. She gasped at the sudden vulnerability, trying to close her legs, but his body between them prevented it. His fingers found her then, sliding through slick folds that parted eagerly for him. She was embarrassingly wet, her body preparing itself despite her mind's frantic protests. One thick finger pressed inside her, and she cried out at the stretch, the foreign fullness that made her clench around him instinctively. "Shish, darlin'," he finally spoke, voice rough as gravel. "Gonna take care of you." He worked her slowly, deliberately, adding a second finger when she began to move against his hand. Her head fell back against the wall, eyes squeezed shut as waves of pleasure built inside her. This was what the girls in town whispered about, this forbidden ecstasy that made good girls go bad. When he withdrew his fingers, she made a sound of protest before she could stop herself. The loss left her empty, aching. Then she felt him fumbling with his belt, the clink of metal loud in the quiet barn. Her eyes flew open to watch him free himself, and her breath caught at the sight. He was huge, thick and long, flushed dark with need. The preacher's daughter stared, equal parts terrified and fascinated. There was no way that would fit inside her virgin body. No way at all. "Boone, wait," she started, but he was already positioning himself, the broad head nudging against her entrance. Their eyes met in the moonlight. His jaw was clenched tight, restraint visible in every line of his massive frame. But there was something else too, something wild and uncontrolled flickering behind those dark eyes. "Don't," she whispered desperately as he began to push forward. "Don't come inside me. Please, Boone. I'm begging you." The words tumbled out in a rush, born of fear and the last remnants of her upbringing. Her father's voice in her head warning about consequences, about ruined girls and bastard children. She wouldn't, risk that. But Boone didn't stop. The pressure increased steadily, inexorably, until the head breached her entrance. She was impossibly tight, her body resisting even as it welcomed him. The stretch burned, a sharp pain that made tears spring to her eyes. He paused then, just barely inside her, letting her adjust. His hands stroked her thighs soothingly, thumbs tracing circles on her skin. When she relaxed slightly, he pushed deeper, slow, relentless inches that filled her beyond what she thought possible. The pain gradually gave way to something else, something that made her toes curl and her fingers dig into his shoulders. When he was fully seated inside her, they both stilled, breathing hard. She could feel every throb of him, every twitch, as her body stretched to accommodate his size. Then he began to move. Slow at first, letting her feel every drag of him against her inner walls. Each thrust sent sparks through her nerves, building that same pleasure from before into something overwhelming. Her legs tightened around his waist, pulling him deeper even as her mind screamed at her to stop this madness. Faster, she heard herself moan, shocked at her own wantonness. Boone obliged, his control fraying as he drove into her harder. The barn filled with the sounds of their joining, the wet slap of skin on skin, her breathless cries, his guttural groans. Hay scratched against her back as he pressed her harder against the wall, using it for leverage to thrust deeper. The coil inside her tightened unbearably. She was climbing toward something she'd never experienced, something that terrified her with its intensity. Her nails raked down his back through his shirt, urging him on even as tears streamed down her cheeks. Please, she gasped again, though now she wasn't sure what she was begging for. Don't come inside me. But her body had other ideas, clenching around him rhythmically as she neared the edge. Boone's movements became erratic, his breathing ragged against her neck. She could feel him swelling inside her, growing even larger as his own release approached. The pleasure crested suddenly, crashing over her in waves that left her shaking and crying out his name. Her inner muscles clamped down hard, milking him in rhythmic pulses that seemed designed to pull him deeper. Boone groaned long and low, burying himself to the hilt as his control finally snapped. She felt the first hot spurt deep inside her, then another, and another, his release flooding her in powerful jets that seemed endless. He didn't pull out, didn't even try. Instead, he held her pinned against the wall, pulsing inside her until he was spent. Only then did he lower her gently to the hay-strewn floor, still connected, still filling her with his warmth. She lay there beneath him, trembling with aftershocks, feeling his seed slowly leaking out around where they joined. The preacher's daughter stared up at the barn rafters, tears drying on her cheeks as the full weight of what had happened settled over her. Boone pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard. His hand moved between them, thumb gently circling where they were still joined, drawing small aftershocks from her oversensitive body. Couldn't stop, he murmured finally, voice rough with satisfaction rather than regret. Not with you begging so pretty. She should have been angry. Should have pushed him away and run crying to her father. Instead, she found herself arching into his touch, her body already craving more despite the ache between her legs and the warmth slowly dripping down her thighs. The night stretched on around them, filled with hay-scented darkness and the sound of their breathing slowly returning to normal. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly, but neither of them moved to separate. Her legs remained wrapped around him, holding him close even as her mind reeled from what they'd done, what he'd done inside her, marking her in the most permanent way possible. The preacher's virgin daughter was virgin no longer, and the evidence of her fall was warm and wet between her thighs, slowly seeping into the hay beneath them.